No matter how much some of us run into reality check after reality check, those without desire to grow in maturity will remain in delusion and will repeat the courses of reality check until they get with the program. No matter how much you want to deny reality, you will eventually get with the program, one way or another. In the fifth episode of the HBO miniseries Chernobyl, there are copious examples of the addiction to delusion. Stay tuned, because in this video, we are finally coming to grips with the leading cause of equipment failure within human error. Welcome to this special edition of the Life Lessons series. The more I review this series, the more I noticed how the concept of nuclear fission has some similarities to divide and conquer. The more lies and delusions we absorb, the more we split our bodies from stability. The amount of energy we release in the form of dysfunction leads to ourselves becoming more and more mentally altered, just like the material. If not intervened, this continues until we can no longer sustain our functions and eventually shut down, which is ultimately what happened back then. Let's go through the final set of lessons in this series, in episode 5. Number 1. Making promises out of desire for recognition can lead to recklessness. In a meeting between Anatoly Dyatlov, Viktor Brekhanov, and Nikolai Fomin, they conversed about a plan to perform a safety test for Reactor Unit 4. Fomin was in Brekhanov's office with Dyatlov discussing if the test was completed successfully, promotions were likely to take place. Brekhanov to another position, and Fomin taking Brekhanov's position. Once Brekhanov arrived, he reported they had to delay the test for 10 hours due to demand for extra power. There was an issue being that the reactor was already at half power, and Brekhanov questioned if the test should be canceled due to stability issues with the reactor at lower levels. Dyatlov assured that he would supervise the test to completion, which would take place in the midnight hours and with less experienced staff. Ultimately, there was political pressure for this test to be completed, and we'll discuss this a bit later. It is abundantly clear, however, within this discussion that pride related to hopes for promotion were prioritized over safety measures. While it is true that the direct factors about the reactor were classified, that does not excuse the negligence for what is known: the stability issues of the reactor, the less experienced staff. Any safety test should always be performed by more senior, experienced staff. Therefore, the recklessness has already started. Impulses as this can happen at any level in the chain. It is undeniable that higher positions are absolutely stressful. However, this does not override the accountability for reckless decisions, nor does it excuse disrespectful and distrustful behavior towards subordinates. Perhaps this urge to be accepted is driven by our social nature, and honestly, the naturality is fine. What is not okay is compromising ourselves into dysfunctional behavioral patterns in an attempt to earn the social acceptance. What benefit is there in becoming dysfunctional when dysfunction itself does not even uphold standards and it denies reality? There is no benefit in seeking acceptance from people that intend to stay broken. Remember, when you are in charge, you are responsible for everything that authority supervises, whether you understand it or not. Therefore, only commit to operations with high probability of success and minimal risk. Number 2. Bribery, manipulation, and intimidation do not override the human conscience to obey truth and reality. Mr. Cherkov, first deputy chairman of the KGB, presented Professor Legasov with the Hero of the Soviet Union Award. This was in part to thank him for presenting his report of the disaster in Vienna, Austria, which was not the whole story, by the way. With one other requisite, the reward would have been his. The final task was to testify scientific evidence at trial against Viktor Brekhanov Nikolai Fomin, and Anatoly Dyatlov for criminal mismanagement. Legasov was to present the evidence and leave out any details related to design flaws of the reactor. Legasov questioned why there had not been any discussion on adjustments to the reactors yet. Mr. Cherkov assured that all the political matters needed to be dealt with first, to which the trial was the only one remaining. After that, he affirmed the reactors could be dealt with. Does this sound familiar to anyone? Promises that are never kept? I'm sure you can recall at least a handful of scenarios where you have been bribed, gaslit, or even intimidated into silence in sharing the truth, and to hide a problem. This is what those with little to no conscience will do to maintain their lies, their delusion, their dysfunction. Their problem is not really with you. Their problem is with truth and reality. And since you are an ally with truth and you are accessible, their attention turns to you and anyone else associated accordingly. They have chosen to pick a reckless and meaningless fight with truth and reality, mainly in the name of their feelings. Even so, the convictions of truth are much stronger than any manipulation. Just as one can eventually crack in the resistance to dysfunction, the same concept applies to truth and reality. The difference is everything makes its way back to truth and reality. Notice the amount of resources wasted to keep something classified, only for that to fail. Deal with issues the right way as soon as possible before truth and reality schedules it for you. Number 3. The accountability for truth and reality is eternal and costs what it costs. Ms. Ulana Komyuk pleaded with Professor Legasov to share the truth of what happened at the trial. The reason for this is because fellow scientists from the Kurchatov Institute would be present at the trial. Ms. Komyuk believed it would be the perfect opportunity to share what actually happened with them at that time, to insist on reform within the industry. Professor Legasov argued that the trial was nothing more than a dog and pony show, and that the verdict was already decided. Any defiance by him would be met with consequence. At some point, we have to consider what we really answer to. Avoiding truth and reality might just be the most reckless and foolish act we can ever commit. Some even argue why the cost of truth is so high, and yet they rarely or never batted an eye to the cost of dysfunction. Therefore, the issue is not really cost. There is actually another element at work here, within the human conscience. Number 4. Rushing operations to completion yields potentially dangerous consequences. In the trial during Mr. Sherbina's testimony, he informed Viktor Brekharnov had signed a certificate that confirmed the completion of construction for the reactor. However, he mentioned in order for that document to be signed, all safety tests had to be successfully completed, to which one remained. That one being the power redundancy capability of the diesel generator successfully taking over to power the cooling pumps when the steam-powered generator failed. Wanting something badly enough does not include utilizing methods that compromise safety. Shortcutting may speed through operations, but it also induces negligence. Once the safety is compromised, everything else will be, especially productivity. In one job, I had the honor of working with a supervisor who gave a version of 6 Ps that made total sense. Proper planning and preparation prevents poor performance, end quote. Meanwhile, the opposite would be, quote, poor planning and preparation prevents proper performance, end quote. Proper maintenance and grounding in reality ensures operations run smoothly, and it takes the time it needs to take, and it costs what it costs. Now, before those in management positions, whether in professional or household settings, address how harsh and selfish that sounds, you might want to take a look in the mirror, because many of you have similar thinking, but there is a difference. You take as much time as you want to obtain the result you want, even when it's unreasonable. Truth and reality takes the time that's required to develop or repair something correctly so it is stable and efficient. So if you find the taste of your own medicine unpleasant, the worst way to handle it is trying to force it down others' throats. Knock it off with the pity parties. So what drives poor planning and preparation? We're getting there. Number 5. Most technical discrepancies consist of two problematic elements. In the trial during Ms. Komyuk's testimony, she shared that the disaster is a result of two problems. One of them is scientific in nature, and the other being human-related. In the late-night hours, there was a shift change. More senior engineers left, and less experienced engineers took over. By the depiction in the film, the operators at Unit 4 had not been notified of the safety test operation until they arrived on site. What's worse, some instructions had been crossed out, and the operators were understandably confused. Things were worsened when Mr. Dyatlov appeared in the control room, in which the film depicted him as harsh and grumpy, rising to the level of harassment and abuse by today's HR standards in the US. However, I think it's important to bring this to the forefront. There are other articles available that contradict this depiction. Some links are in the description. We shall carry on with the lessons within the film. As mentioned before, the leading cause of equipment failure is human error. Therefore, the severity of the scientific problems are directly proportional to human actions. And as we are learning more and more, the human error does not stop at the level of the operators and not even the immediate supervisors. It can take place anywhere in the chain, even as high as the public official's chain of command. Yes, those in public office are human as well, and that is very important to remember. Two of the top issues human society has with technology is maintenance necessities and safety culture. They tend to figure out the financial avenues to obtain the equipment to perform operations, but maintenance and safety factors are oftentimes frowned upon. If they were not, there would not be any need for safety regulations and codes. And the common reason for them being frowned at is because they don't happen often, so management believes they are wasting their money. That is, until a disaster actually happens. That kind of thinking is no different from wanting to cancel insurance policies because nothing has happened yet. Safety culture is there to reduce the possibility of a disaster, and then insurance is there for when the disaster is imminent beyond the capabilities of safety culture. Why is that so difficult to accept? Not understand, but accept. Could it be that we treat technology just as bad as we treat ourselves when it comes to proper maintenance? What element is driving this scoff at maintenance as a whole? Not to worry, we are getting closer. Number 6. Blaming others for the results of your choices is irresponsible, immature, and unethical. As the operators Leonid Toptunov and Alex Akimov worked tediously to bring the reactor to the specified power level, the power level began dropping rapidly, to the point of basically stalling. Dyatlov, who had stepped out while waiting for the final power level, returned and became severely angry and annoyed, blaming Toptunov and Akimov for the results. However, the operators cannot be blamed for this. Just earlier in the day, there was discussion about stability issues with the reactor at lower power levels. Plus, in this depiction, Dyatlov stepped out of the control room and therefore was not even directly supervising. And remember, this is a team that has never done anything like this before. This kind of behavior happens both in family households and the workforce, and it is unacceptable and inexcusable. There are consequences for our decisions and actions, and the sooner we come to grips with truth and reality, the lesser the impacts we will suffer. Going against truth and reality is no different from walking into a minefield, disregarding the warnings. We know better, so let's do better. Number 7. Avoid going excessive miles for those who earned mistrust. During the trial recess, Mr. Sherbina reflected with Professor Legasov on his health condition, to which it was just as Professor Legasov anticipated. He was down to less than 5 years of life due to a cancer-related illness. In addition, he pondered on the fact that he was sent to Chernobyl as just another consequential operative within the committee. He even hoped that he would matter to them one day. Professor Legasov assured Mr. Sherbina that he absolutely did matter, and that the committee made a huge mistake sending a good man who listened and got every set of material the scientists ever needed. They may have heard Legasov, but they listened to Sherbina. Actions will show you an individual's true intentions, and it is up to you to make the decision to continue dwelling in that environment or leave. When people are treating you like you are expendable, it's time to leave. When people are treating you like you are less than human, it's time to leave. There is no legitimate reason to sacrifice your future for the sake of people with a care for me only mindset. One example, in my years as a technician in the audiovisual and IT field, I have seen this pattern several times over. I have even witnessed people who said directly within earshot that us technicians do not mind spending money. The tone and word usage indicated this was their view on technicians whenever they report an issue. That is when they tend to play the technician and find something cheaper, but it does not fulfill their own demands, and then expect the technicians to make it happen some way, somehow. This pattern continued at various levels in the industry, and I am now at a point where I will not compromise if what a client or an employer wants to invest will lead to failure. Either I will remove myself from the environment, or I will make sure I have receipts. That's the common terminology for having a paper trail of truth and facts to show your innocence. I do this at the early warning signs of delusion. Argue for them to get a pass due to their ignorance all you want, but in circumstances like this, there is another element you are refusing to acknowledge that is driving this behavior. Number 8. Cheaper methods do not always equal more efficient or safer. In the trial during Professor Legasov's testimony, he revealed the design flaw of the reactor vessel in which the tips of the control rods, which act like the brakes for the chain reaction, actually had graphite in front of them, which this material accelerates reactivity. The presiding judge asked why this is. Professor Legasov's answer:
for the same reason our reactors do not have containment buildings around them, like those in the West. For the same reason we don't use properly enriched fuel in our cores. For the same reason, we are the only nation that builds water-cooled, graphite-moderated reactors with a positive void coefficient. It's cheaper.
None of these cheap methods stopped a disaster from occurring. In fact, there was another RBMK reactor at another location years prior in which another scientist alerted the issue with the graphite tips. But as depicted in the film,
do you know what happened to Volkov, the man whose report you found? They just removed him from his position at the Institute. Sacked for the crime of knowing.
it appears that many in the human race have a huge problem with truth and reality being vindicated from any obligation to accommodate their delusion. Folks, please hear me on this. That cost you think you are saving is going to get charged from somewhere else. The debt will be paid in full, one way or another. When you choose cheaper methods that compromise quality, the rest of the debt is charged through the disasters due to those cheaper options unable to sustain the demand, which furthermore taxes currencies you would never put on the table. Those currencies can be your reputation, your sanity, your physical health, and in some cases, your life. It can even be that those elements will be taxed from others, all because you wanted to go with your idea. Your idea, your ideology, your pride was more important than everything else. In many cases, you have time to get it right, and it's best you choose to get it right before it's too late. And for those who argue that a person does not know any better, once we are aware of that, we have a responsibility to humble ourselves and pay attention so we can learn. I have personally witnessed people who were made aware of what they did not know, and they still chose recklessness. Number 9, develop as many safety avenues as possible when planning to blow the whistle. As Professor Legasov's testimony continued, he then called out in a nutshell that the Soviet state bears some responsibility for what happened, and he was warned that he was treading on dangerous ground. This essentially is blowing the whistle, and as we all know, anytime we do this, we sever all trust with the people in question, and in some cases, even bystanders. Therefore, it is important that we have auxiliary means already in place to sustain our living, because chances are not many who catch wind of this, especially other companies, are going to want to consider associating with us afterwards. Blowing the whistle is one of the quickest ways to find out who is about truth and reality and those who are about delusion. These days, standing for truth and reality yields a very small group of travelers. Number 10, make peace with truth and reality sooner than later. Subsequently, as Professor Legasov had blown the whistle of the design flaws and the secrecy, he further addressed man's own discrepancy with truth.
Because of our secrets and our lies, they're practically what define us. When the truth offends, we lie and lie until we can no longer remember it is even there, but it is still there. Every lie we tell incurs a debt to the truth. Sooner or later, that debt is paid.
So what is the sole issue man has with the truth that causes us to want to avoid it? Here is what I've discovered. There are those of us who just find truth to be inconvenient. Some treat inconvenience like a disaster, and disaster like inconvenience. What's worse, truth has been unjustly given a bad reputation for so long. Do you remember the statement, "Truth hurts"? How valid is that statement exactly? I beg to argue that we are turning away our focus from what actually hurts: misconduct. Misconduct is really what hurts us. Lying is what hurts us. Delusion is what hurts us. And then there's also the statement, "The truth shall set you free." Why are we not saying this statement more than the former? If we really look at it, is not the truth trying to show us the errors so we are not deceived by lies? So is it not actually trying to set us free? The writings are right on the wall. So by common sense and the facts thereof, the statement "truth hurts" is nothing more than a scapegoat attempt to keep people in mental bondage with lies and delusion. There is one simple thing about us that is the number one cause of failure in any interaction, including equipment failure. Stay tuned. We're almost there. finally, number 11. Suppression of the truth is only temporary and has an expiration date. After Professor Legasov's testimony, he was brought to a private, guarded location to meet with Mr. Chekhov, who sentenced him to isolation. This was all that could be done since his name was in circulation across the world. He was stripped of his authority on everything and was never to discuss anything about Chernobyl ever again. Legasov's final message via the audio tape had this to say:
To be a scientist is to be naive. We are so focused on our search for truth, we fail to consider how few actually want us to find it. But it is always there, whether we see it or not, whether we choose to or not. The truth doesn't care about our needs or wants. It doesn't care about our governments, our ideologies, our religions. It will lie in wait for all time, and this, at last, is the gift of Chernobyl. Where I once would fear the cost of truth, now I only ask, what is the cost of lies?
Ultimately, in combination with Professor Legasov's self-resignation from the living and also the documentation he left behind, which was circulated by the scientific community, public officials finally acknowledged the design flaws of the RBMK reactors, and they were retrofitted to prevent another disaster as Unit 4. There were alleged observations that this radioactive fallout disaster was one of the major causes for the Soviet Union's dissolution. So as we can see, even with all of the resources to cover things up, what should have been done to start with was done anyway, but with even more resources than it would have taken if it was handled proactively. Only proactivity will prevent a disaster from occurring. The address of alleged money constraints and opinionated views are all unmerited excuses. No one can stop the truth from fulfilling its purpose, and it has no obligation to accommodate our delusion. The more we fight against the truth, the greater the consequences we will endure. A war with truth and reality is one we will never win. No matter how many people we deceive, gaslight, intimidate, or even murder, it will not stop the truth from fulfilling its purpose. And with that, we've reached the completion of the lessons within this mini-series. So what is the leading cause of equipment failure related to human error? It goes further than just the end users, operators, or management. The impact goes even further than technology, as it also affects human relations. There is one common denominator between all parties involved, in which they all share a common tendency when left unmanaged. The answer is attitude. Your attitude will determine how you respond when you don't know something, when you are made aware of what you don't know, how much you actually respect what you don't know, and when you don't get your way. Your attitude will show whether you even have a desire to remedy that ignorance, and also how reasonable you will be at it. Your attitude will show whether you are the type that seeks to solve a problem or just attempt to hide it, in the foolishness of hope that it does not resurface. Attitude is a critical factor in warranting outcomes. It is the critical link in the chain of critical events. involving us humans, which will determine success or disaster. Your attitude can also deceive you into believing you are entitled to circumventing consequences. A quote from Richard Feynman, a well-known physicist who was appointed in the Space Shuttle Challenger Accident Investigative Committee. Quote, "For a successful technology, reality must take precedence over public relations, for nature cannot be fooled." Close quote. This also holds true for all scenarios of life. For success in any operation, whether technical, biological, and even interactive, reality must take precedence over ego, for nature cannot be fooled. And yes, that includes our feelings. Our feelings cannot take precedence over reality. So the final question, now that you are aware, has your attitude changed for the better? You have been presented with the lessons, and now it's your responsibility to apply them. In addition, it's your responsibility to pay attention to any other lessons that life is to teach you. Once you are made aware you don't know everything, it's your responsibility to humble yourself and listen to get the facts, then apply them with wisdom. It's your future, after all. Your life, your choice, your body, your choice, which also includes what you choose to consume and even present with your own actions. You can choose the mature route and avoid a lot of trouble, or you can choose the immature route and sign yourself up to the concept that is commonly expressed these days, known as, quote, "mess around and find out," close quote. And history shows us time and time again how that worked out for our human peers back then. I appreciate you taking the time to watch this video series, and I hope it has helped you to consider mature decisions moving forward. Are there lessons you learned in this episode of the miniseries? By all means, please share them in the comments. If you enjoyed this video and haven't done so already, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Also be sure to activate notifications to be informed of the next production. Life is full of lessons, and although we might not be perfect, we are capable of improvement. So until next time, stay wise and stay committed to personal development.